All right, hello and welcome to the event tonight. We're so thrilled to have you all here, especially on quite a hot day. So in a way, it's nice that we're able to spread out a bit. I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who is a member of climate classes, for a brief introduction, and then without further ado, we will get to the panel.
Welcome to River Talk, climate classes panel on the history and social impacts of the Anacostia and Potomac rivers. Both of these rivers and watersheds are important for the hydrology and water resources of the Washington, D.C. region. Tonight's panel will focus on the history and biodiversity of the rivers, our changing relationship to the rivers, and including pollution in them, and importantly, the work of 3 D.C. organizations to restore the rivers. Before I introduce our moderator and speakers, Climate Classes would like to thank our partner organizations for this event. Earth Conservation Corps is allowing Climate Classes to use this venue for our panel discussion. We'd also like to thank the Anacostia Watershed Society and the Anacostia Riverkeeper for hosting the boat tours following this panel. We'd also like to thank the Anacostia Riverkeeper, the DC Department of Energy and Environment, and the Potomac Conservancy for the incredible panelists with us tonight. Finally, we'd like to thank Donka Beer Garden for providing us with space for our reception following this event. Climate Classes would not have been able to organize this event without you. I'd now like to introduce our panelist and moderator. Katie Blackman from the Potomac Conservancy has a background in volunteer organizing and manages the clean water goals for the Conservancy. Gretchen Mikeska is the Anacostia coordinator in the DC government DOEE. She manages the Anacostia River Sediment Project. And coordinates with other DOEE initiatives for the river. Matthew Weber is the Restoration Branch Chief for DOEE. He's worked in government management and has implemented several stormwater projects. Trey, Sherard from the Anacostia Riverkeeper was an outreach coordinator before becoming the Riverkeeper and has worked on several community partnerships for the Anacostia River. Tonight's panel will be moderated by Climate Classes Chairman, Catherine Christopher. I'll hand the microphone over to Catherine now.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Tim. Thanks again to everyone for being here tonight. We're so excited to be able to share this wonderful discussion with all of you, a boat tour afterwards, and then for those who are so inclined, maybe a drink or a few appetizers and talk after that. But let's go ahead and get started without further ado. I'd first like to talk to Trey and Katie and have them open it up with a discussion about the history of the 2 rivers that we will be discussing more in depth tonight. Trey, I'll turn to you first. Could you just give us an overview of the Anacostia River, kind of thinking along the lines of who has historically lived on and used the river's resources, and then maybe just a bit, although we'll get a little further into this, how has the relationship to that river changed with DC?
So my name is Trey Sherard. I'm the Riverkeeper and Anacostia Riverkeeper. The Anacostia River's history goes back before it was called the Anacostia River. It was labeled by European colonists, Eastern Branch of the Potomac. The Anacostia name comes from what we understand the name of the tribes to have been Piscataway peoples, the Anacostia tribe that got Romanized into the Anacostan tribe that ended up becoming Anacostia across a bunch of different European maps as we move forward through colonization. There are a couple of Anacostia sites that are not well documented. There's a couple of websites and groups trying to do that work better. A lot of their artifacts and history is lost. So we know that the Anacostia were here on first contact. John Smith, the European colonists, know that they stayed for a little while in the colonization and then started to get pushed out, started to build up with disease, after being attacked and raids. They retreated to what is now Roosevelt Island and Potomac River, and then they retreated again. And pretty much those who survived merged into what we now know as the Piscataway tracts that are operating in Maryland. So that was the original human landscape of the Anacostia River as we understand it, going back from prehistory into first contact and a little ways into European colonization. That was listed as the river teeming with fish, right? Too many fish to paddle, the fish were just everywhere, the water was clear, and that's obviously not what we see today. We have a lot of fish, we have a lot of the wrong kind of fish. European colonization found this watershed to be really, really productive. So they found it productive at first for beaver, and at that point beaver pelts were still in fashion for hats and other clothing in Europe. That fell out of fashion pretty quickly, not before a lot of damage was done to beaver habitat. Because they're environmental engineers, it wasn't just the beaver populations, right, but a lot of damage to those knock-on effects from how they build habitat. European colonists then focused on tobacco, so that was a big part of the next several hundred years of use of the Anacostia River. That's also where we get into the first use of the Anacostia River. Tobacco was handled at that time, clear cutting, so a lot of deforestation. A lot of the setting up of problems that we continue to have today started as far back as that first round of colonization. So this history is really pivoting hard about changing people and that change.
Yes. So, Katie, you are working on the Potomac River, so I've got a very similar question for you. But could you also kind of introduce the river to us? Tell us about the river and its history.
Sure. My name is Katie Blackman. I'm Vice President of Programs and Operations at Potomac Conservancy. It's a big question and not a lot of time. There is evidence of human beings living on and near the Potomac for over 10,000 years. So when we talk about the first peoples that were here, we don't actually know all the history of the people that were here. We do know a lot about the people that were here at the time of European contact. But I will also say the river is 400 miles long. So to say that the relationship with the river is the same as the headwaters as it is in the tidal portions would be inaccurate. So the relationship with the river really depends on kind of where you live. It's one of the most biologically diverse regions in the country. We see the coastal plains and the Piedmont kind of coming together right at the Potomac Gorge, which causes a huge amount of biodiversity, which also means so that the ways in which people use and live around the river is very different depending on where you are along that 400-mile stretch. We do know at time of European contact that the Powhatan, Piscataway, and Anacostia were some of the indigenous groups that were living here. The Potomac is actually an anglicized version of the Potomac name, which was a village where actually in 1613, Pocahontas was kidnapped from that village in 1613, and that's where the name Potomac comes from. I think what we see is, like Trey was saying, at time of contact is where we see a reciprocal relationship with the river really shifting to an extractive relationship with the river. And that really was catalyzed during the Industrial Revolution. We start to see much more industrial agriculture as we know it today. We see a lot more development and pollution into the river up until we get to 1960, where then President Johnson called the Potomac River a national disgrace. My father-in-law actually rode through in Georgetown in the 1960s and used to talk about how careful they had to be not to get the Potomac water on their skin as they were running on the river. That is not the case today, thankfully. We are, groups like ours, like folks who have on the panel today, are working really hard to return to a more reciprocal relationship with the river. We're not there yet. As Trey mentioned, the river used to be famous for being so full of fish and big cattle. We're just at a quarter of where we used to be. While I don't think that it's likely we'll get back to that place, certainly groups like ours and others are working really hard to restore that reciprocal relationship.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I might have read your mind on this because before we kind of get in even a little further, I wanted to, we've heard kind of background, but also a little bit more about the industrialized pollution that the Potomac has really experienced. I wanted to go even further into the history of the Anacostia, and Trey, give you also an opportunity to talk about the current state of the health of the Anacostia River and causes of lack of health. I think we can all surmise that's probably where we're going to go with that.
That's where I'll get. I wanted to actually introduce the river first, because that was a good phrase, and I skipped over and straight to the history. The Anacostia River is right there. We can all look over your shoulder right now. Since we're recording, in which case you can find some awesome videos on our website and elsewhere for it. The Anacostia River is little. It's not a big river. It's only 8.5 miles long as far as what the blue squiggle is on the map that actually gets labeled river. But it's a 176 square mile watershed. The watershed extends twice again up from where the river ends or starts at Mikeska. So where we're sitting right now, out that window, you can see a mile downriver to the mouth of this river where it has this confluence with Potomac. 7.5 miles up that way, you run into Blackman Waterfront Park, and that's where the northeast and northwest branches of the river come together. That's where they become related to the Potomac. Both of those branches intervene in Georgia County. The northwest branch quickly enters and intervenes in Montgomery County, all the way up to Sandy Spring. So even when traffic is not bad, 1 or 2 hours a day, you can drive an hour, hour and a half from here and be at the very edge of our watershed up in Sandy Spring, Ashton, up above Wheaton. So it's a big watershed. A lot of people don't realize, because so many river miles are in DC, that most of the watershed is actually in Maryland. In fact, a lot of people that live in the watershed of Maryland don't live in it. Know that they live in this watershed, right? They have no idea of their watershed address or what they do daily interacts with it. That's happened on the individual level. People don't know that what they do interacts with the river. It's also happened with a blind eye towards companies, utilities, and government. So shifting back into some of the more current pollution, after all the sedimentation and resulting from tobacco farming, we moved into urbanization. And so that's where you start to see sewage coming into the river. If you don't know, DC saw a full 10-time jump in population during the Civil War from before the Civil War, in just the space of a couple of years. That's not people that stayed. After the Civil War, it dropped right back down. But even post-Civil War III, it was, I think, a 2 or 3 time jump. And so all of a sudden, the size of the city, people-wise and resources used-wise and waste-reduced-wise, lurched 10 and then still 3 times. None of the infrastructure changed. That's where we start to see the impacts from sewage. And that's when we have open sewers. That's when you have the President of the United States losing a son in the White House to waterborne disease. Right? Lincoln's son really died inside the White House of typhoid fever, which is something that we don't think about after we get a shot when we're very young. You see that turn into the combined sewers, right, where they use the runoff from all the streets to flush the sewer out to the river to keep the city sanitary, but compromise the river. We continue to grow the city further and further. We continue to pave the city, right? And then by the end of the 1800s, probably 1900s, they finally moved away from open sewers, was that big, into combined sewers. They're still using the rainwater opportunities to wash the sewers out. And that's the case in DC. It's the case in a lot of cities, not just here. This is not unique to us. They don't finally start separating the sewers and treating some of the sewage. So I think the 40s or 50s before blue lanes was built. And then it just got more and more tighter, more and more advanced treatment ever since then. The chemical pollution that we see here now, today, right, 2023, are almost entirely the very same chemicals that Rachel Carson wrote about in the 60s. Rachel Carson lived for a long time in our watershed. If you don't know, the prettiest stretch of the upper watershed is the Northwest Branch. There's a series of small cascades coming down. It was one of Teddy Roosevelt's favorite spots. It's called the Rachel Carson Greenway now. And when she worked with Fish and Wildlife Service, she lived in Silver Spring for a very long time. She wrote that in the 60s. We're still talking about the same chemicals now. All we've done is add to the list of chemicals. We haven't actually gotten rid of the ones that are legacy from the latest 1800s into the early 1900s. We made DDT, the pesticides. You still see DDT in the water column after a rainy day. right? 4 PCBs, about 200 chemicals that are our main driver for toxic cleanup. And now we have scary things like PFAS, PFOS, PFOA, that we don't know how much of it there are. DC's just recently started doing some of that testing, and other nonprofits have just started doing some of that testing too. So we have things that we don't even know how much they are yet coming in. So the problems are not documented, right? They've moved around a little bit. But our toxic solution, particularly for industrial waste, was very much focused inside people, right? Making people sick, and inside the fish, some of the people that are moving around the system.
Thank you, Trey. I'm going to now go over to Gretchen to ask you a little bit, we've got the history of these rivers and these waterways. And I want to talk a little bit about how, especially some of the things that Trey just talked about, do affect the populations here in the health of the populations here in DC and generally the health of our city.
So as Trey said, the watershed is really quite big, 176 square miles, and so we only have about 20% here in the district. So when we're working with our partners, it's really important that we engage with Maryland, because we realize, I always tell people, we can do everything we can here in the city to clean up the Anacostia River, but we're really at the end of the tail line here. So we get everything that's sent to us. So essentially, the development of the upper watershed, more or less, the more impermeable pavement that we add, the worse the water quality and the sediment is going to get. And so over time, we have more residential development, and with residential development, you get lawns, you get dogs, and all the chemicals that go with residential development. Kind of the good news is the big industries that we have here. Those are now considered our legacy contaminants, because those industries have more or less cleaned up or entirely shut down. Like right here, Washington Navy Yard is the oldest federal facility in the country, so they've been operating since 1790. So there's a lot of contaminants right out here from Navy Yard, but they tend to be legacy contaminants. And it does take a while to figure out where they all are and how we're going to clean them up. But the ongoing production there isn't like it was certainly back at the turn of the 17th and 18th century. Same in Washington gas, where they had manufactured gas right up here. That was also, that was one of the historic pictures. It was also a very dirty site, resulting in a lot of PAHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons that are now in sediment. So we're working on cleaning those up. So, overall, some things just because of development and more population, some things get worse. But we, at DOEE, and Matt will probably talk about this in some because it's with his group, we work with our Clean River homes. We're encouraging homeowners to put in permeable pavers and rain barrels, and then we have a lot of rain gardens that we've installed around the city. So there is ways that we can, even with increasing development, make the development site more permeable than it might have been in the past, where these new techniques had not been engaged.
Thanks, Gretchen. And so, Matthew, I'm sure you probably never thought I was going to ask you a question, but here we are. I feel like we can't have a panel by a group called Climate Classes without talking about the inevitable, which is, of course, climate change. In a warming climate, could you tell us a little bit about how floods could become more common in places like the mid-Atlantic U.S., and in particular, the DMV? And how will this increased probability of flooding impact the water quality and the restoration of these rivers?
Sure. How's the volume? Is that okay? Yep, thank you for the question. So with a warming climate, we will be already experiencing longer periods of drought, and then also more intense rainstorms when we do have them. And both of those spell trouble for water quality. Let me start with the warming climate, how increasing floods impacts water quality. I probably have a lot of job security in my current position, in that with increasing storm events and flooding, our streams do not look like streams and tributaries that feed the Anacostia River, for example. They don't look like they used to. A lot of them have been piped and buried underground, and those that are still above ground have been channelized and hardened decades ago. That was just to move stormwater and rainwater faster from point A to point B. With increasing rainfall and storm events, the water is only going to be moving faster and causing more erosion and carrying more soil and sediment and pollutants downstream and depositing it into our waterways. Fortunately, there is something we can do. In the District of Columbia, we do practice stream restoration projects. I love these projects. However, they are large scale, they're multi-million-dollar projects. They take several years to identify, to plan, and design, and then construct. These are big construction projects. But through stream restoration, we're able to help spread out those larger storm events and help reconnect our streams with the floodplain. In many instances, reduce flooding within the district. So that's just one tool, one best practice that we practice in the district and that I like talking about. And then maybe later we'll get into a little bit more detail, and I'll just list some of the stream restoration projects in different wards around the district. Because odds are you live nearby a restoration project you may not know about.
So, Peggy, your Potomac Conservancy also publishes a Potomac River report and a Potomac climate report. And so I think to just follow on with what Matt was already starting to tell us, what do these particular reports tell us about our region and the effects of climate change on these rivers?
Yeah, so I'll just say, for those who don't know, the Anacostia is a tributary of the Potomac, which means a tributary just means that it flows into the Potomac. So it is a part of the Potomac watershed. So when we're talking about Potomac Conservancy and Potomac watershed, we're talking about the Anacostia as well. So many of the things that the other panelists are saying specific to the Anacostia are things that we really care about too, because it's a part of our watershed. We publish 2 reports. We publish a river report card that focuses on the Potomac watershed. So we're not just talking about the river itself, but all of those tributaries that feed into the Potomac. We do that every other year. We've done it since 2011. And that's a backwards look at the health of the Potomac. So we look at 24 different data points. It's everything from water quality to the pollutants that are in the water, to how our lands are doing, to how people are using the river and its tributaries. And when we first published the report over 10 years ago, it was the D. We like to say that this is a river on the comeback, because we just released the 2023 report card and it's at a B. And that's significant progress. So we talked a lot, we've heard about how there are these legacy pollutants. We can kind of look back to the Clean Water Act and see a giant hose pipe that we pump and use directly into our water got turned off. What our report card is telling us is the only growing threat to the Potomac is what we call urban polluted runoff. So anytime that it rains, any water that doesn't get absorbed into the ground, so a pervious surface, anything that hits an impervious surface, which means that water can't be absorbed, flows into our streams, that then flows into our rivers, that eventually ends up in the Potomac and then Chesapeake Bay. So that includes all the kind of normal things that come along with rainfall. It also includes any pollutants that are on the ground, pet waste, lawn fertilizers, agricultural fertilizers, all of that ends up in our water. We take this look every 2 years because we want to get trends over time. And what we found is things like agricultural pollution are holding steady or decreasing, but we're finding that urban polluted runoff is increasing. And that's really troubling because essentially that's death by 1,000 cuts. right? It's coming from all of these different places. There's not a big hose pipe you can turn off anymore. So we need to be really thoughtful about development and things like that because of exacerbated conditions by the climate crisis. And so we released 2 years ago, now a year ago, we released a climate report. It's the first of its kind for our region that's looking at how is climate change going to specifically impact our region. So I really encourage you to go to PotomacClimateReport.org. There's lots of information. It's a 6-part series. It deals with everything from what temperature is going to look like. Spoiler alert, it's going to be real hot. It's going to be like this most of the summer. 120 days a year, about 90 degrees. So we're looking at increased heat, but we're also looking at this flooding. And what we found is there's several types of flooding that are really concerning. One of which that I'll just touch on now is what we call sunny day flooding. So it's a bright beautiful day, there's no rain in the sky, and suddenly everything floods. And that happens frequently now in Alexandria. So we've seen an increase of 100 to 150% of sunny day flooding over the last 20 years. We're going to see more of that. And with that flooding, what that means for our region is that the water flows in and it takes all of those pollutants that we were just talking about that flows off of our lawns, off of our roads, and it puts it right into the water. It's really concerning for us because the Potomac River. How many of you live in the DC metro area? How many of you drink your tap water? How many of you can point to the source of your drinking water? It's the Potomac River is the source of the water that we drink, and that's true for nearly 5 million people in our region. So we're really concerned about the increase in the climate crisis, which leads to increased flooding, which leads to increased pollution into our water. It's really a public health issue. We looked at a lot of different factors in how the climate crisis is going to impact our region. And we focused a lot on how those impacts are going to be felt unequally by the people that live here. So we know that marginalized and frontline communities are less responsible for the climate crisis, but face those impacts and those burdens from the climate crisis at much greater rates. So it's a public health issue, it is an environmental justice issue, and it is something that the Potomac has made an incredible comeback, but we're going to lose that progress if we don't take steps now to make our river and our communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change.
I want to follow up with a couple more hyper-local supporting things to that. So what no one call an urban pollutant runoff, right? Those agencies and other groups call stormwater runoff. It's rainwater that has hit something hard, we put it away. We picked up the stuff we left there, right? And it runs it into your local water. And in most cases, it is not filtered, it is not captured, it is not cooled off, it is not slowed down before it hits the river. All the sedimentation, this river, the Anacostia River, 8.5 miles long, 100 yards to a quarter mile wide, right, is a centimeter shallower every year. Now, in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and the district are relatively forward-looking jurisdictions, relatively well-funded, right? You have two of the most affluent counties in the country, and in Maryland, and you have the district. The agencies are progressive in most cases. Right? We have the law, the Water Act. We have District of Maryland law. We have county ordinances and city ordinances. We have enforcement in most cases of those ordinances. And with all of that in place, this river is a centimeter shallower a year now, right? Which gives you an idea of how quickly it's sedimented previously. And it gives you an idea of how bad this runoff issue is. Those creeks that Matt talked about are the source of the sediment. The reason they need to be restored, right, is because the stormwater pipes are tearing in. The average DC row home is not big from a square footage point of view. It is 20 feet across, it is 50 feet deep. It's a nice round 1,000 square feet of hard surface before you get sidewalks, driveways, and anything else. In a single inch of rain, and Monday night, a week ago, that was 0.9 inches of rain, so here. In an inch of rain, each row home, every 1,000 square feet of hard surface, row home, sidewalk, road, every 1,000 square feet, yields 600 gallons of runoff. That is 4,800 pounds of water. That is 2.5 tons of water, right, per inch of rain per 1,000 square foot hard surface. And then you start to understand why it piles up so quickly and why it is so erosive. Right? People don't normally think of water by weight unless you carry water. Right? 4,800 pounds of water per roof is a lot, and it gets moving very quickly. And it erodes those streams. It brings them out here. It can cause flooding, flash flooding. If you're familiar with Watts Branch running through Northeast DC, out in the Capitol Heights, Maryland, about 50-50 Prince George's County, DC. That creek is normally, when you get above the tidal section, about 2 feet deep through the channel. That 2 foot deep section, and you can watch this happen on USGS gauges, the United States Geological Survey, becomes 10 feet deep in a storm like that. And then it becomes 2 feet deep again. There's literally a huge chunk of water from that stormwater runoff moving down that creek, eroding it, right, but also picking things up and moving them down. When we talk about the environmental racism, right, we would like to talk about environmental justice. What we have is still environmental racism. 90% of the homes in the floodplain in the district are on Watts Branch. And Gretchen, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe, but I believe they are a majority owned by people in college town. 90% of the homes in the district that are in the floodplain are in Northeast DC and Ward 7. Right? That's something to think about, how who's getting impacted by these things.
Just one more very quick point. And we're talking a lot about impervious surfaces being things that people have introduced, but I also talked about increased periods with climate change, increased periods of drought followed by intense storms. So we are seeing sometimes a month's worth of rain in a 3-hour storm, right? So sometimes that land that's normally something that can absorb water, when it is subject to extended periods of drought, becomes impervious. It becomes really difficult for very dry soil to absorb water. So that's the other piece, is that even when we have green spaces, if we have extended periods of drought followed by intense rainstorms, the green spaces that would normally be able to absorb that water can no longer do it. And so even the places that should be able to absorb become impervious, and that water flows right into. So I just think that's another effect of the climate crisis that we really need to think about.
Thank you both. So I think this is the point of the talk where we all feel sufficiently bummed out, and quite rightfully so. So that's why we have a whole other part of this talk, which is not necessarily so that we can all leave here feeling absolutely wonderful, but so that we can all leave here understanding what, at the very least, 3 large organizations in DC are working to do. So I'm going to take us maybe not a full 180, let's say a 90-degree turn, and let's start talking about the restoration projects that each of your organizations are working on. I'm going to go back to DOEE, and Matt, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to actually just, I'd appreciate it if you could just fill out a little bit for everyone who's here tonight about what the Restoration Branch team does and what some of your current goals are.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Thanks. The Restoration Branch at the Department of Energy and Environment is it's an interdisciplinary team of professionals that I get to work with, 15 individuals, and we're all working towards the common goal of working to restore and protect our rivers and streams and waterway habitats. And this will probably be, I will probably spend the bulk of my career working to help improve the Anacostia and the Potomac rivers, but the majority of work and projects and programs that we work on are not actually on the rivers. We work upstream and upland within the watershed, and I appreciate the description of the death by 1,000 cuts of describing non-point source pollution, stormwater runoff. The good news is I consider the kind of the solution towards managing stormwater pollution and chipping in for watershed protection. There's there's a lot of things that individuals can do, and I'm definitely going to talk about River Smart Homes, my favorite program. So at the small end of the spectrum, there are tens of thousands of small best management practices, also known as green stormwater infrastructure, all across the district. Over 5,000 property owners have installed over 10,000 different best management practices through the River Smart Homes program. And this is a program that we offer residents of the district where we incentivize and provide rebates for the installation of these practices to help manage stormwater before it leaves your property. And this can be done through rain barrels, capturing stormwater runoff, or rain gardens if you have the space in your yard, or basecaping, which is a fancy term for native plantings. We also offer free tree planting. We plant trees for free if you have the space. And I could go on a tangent, but the tree, in my opinion, is the single most effective, my favorite, best management practice for stormwater management, and it's also going to help us with climate change and adaptation. But if you're not familiar with River Smart Homes, and I've tempted you, please go to riversmarthomes.org and learn more, or hit me up after this. But that's at the small end or small scale of the spectrum, or these small installations and best management practices that just about anybody in the district can take advantage of. Maybe you're not a property owner. We also offer a suite of River Smart programs, including River Smart Communities, where we will work with nonprofit organizations and places of worship to retrofit property and install green stormwater infrastructure at no cost. The cost is on us. We also retrofit on school properties and other district properties. So maybe you're not a property owner, but maybe you are a place of worship, or a nonprofit organization that could benefit. Several pieces of the puzzle to help with the stormwater management problem that we have. And then I already kind of discussed the larger scale stream restoration projects that we take on as well. And you probably live within a mile of one of these projects that has either been completed or is planned and coming up. If you've never seen a restored stream in the district, I'll just put this out there, the most accessible one. Next weekend, go over to the National Arboretum, check out Springhouse Run. It was restored a few years ago, restored to its natural state, and there's some signage as well to help explain what the project was.
So I'm now going to turn it over to Gretchen. Earlier in the conversation, Trey had started to introduce us to the sediment that we find in the rivers. And I was hoping you could give us an overview of the Anacostia River Sediment Project.
Sure. When I'm thinking about the restoration of the Anacostia River, I usually go back to the swimmable, fishable, and now I've added in boatable. But swimmable, fishable is a pretty common terminology that some of you might be used to because it was under the Clean Water Act in 1972, where basically the goal of that was to have all waters of the United States swimmable and fishable by 1983. So obviously we did not achieve that goal, but we're still working along. So the Anacostia River Sediment Project is really in the fishable part because we're cleaning up the sediments to make it more healthy for our biota and specifically fish in the river. And that will make it so that when people are catching fish, and Trey has his Friday night fishing, and there's a lot of fish catching going on all the time, but there's fish advisories that have been in place since 1979. They're pretty strict. Depending on the fish, eat a few meals a month, and our overall long-term goal is to really have no fish advisory. But that is a really lofty goal. To do that, we have to clean up the legacy sediments and also any ongoing contamination that's coming into the river. And that is the point of the Anacostia River Sediment Project, which started in 2014. So the mayor at the time allocated $45 million to basically get that off the ground. And so the project itself follows similar to a Superfund site project. It's actually not a Superfund site. The only Superfund site on the river is the Navy Yard site, but we follow the same process. And so that means you first go through and figure out what the nature and extent of contamination is. That's called the remedial investigation. So that went on for about 5 years. And essentially we found that the primary contaminant in the river is PCBs, as Trey and I were describing, and plus other chemicals as well, dioxin, PHs. And then the next step is you figure out, okay, how are we going to clean this up? So then there's a feasibility study, we look at all these cleanup options, and then we choose some options. So that designation of the cleanup, it was done in September 2020. That's called the Record of Decision. And so how we'll be cleaning up the river, we've identified what we call early action areas. Those are our PCB hotspots. And luckily, the other chemicals that are also a problem in the river, generally they're co-located with these hotspots. So we have about 50 acres of hotspots that we will be addressing in the district. There's also the individual sites along the river, like Navy Yard, Petco, Kenilworth. They have their own cleanup plans that are going on simultaneously. So that's another whole discussion we can get into. But what we'll be doing is we'll be what we call capping some of the hotspots, which means you put a sand cap on, and we're also putting some activated carbon to sort of clean up the top surface sediments. And that will be occurring in about 35 acres of the river. We'll also do some dredging. So we're going to do some dredging in Kingman Lake. So Kingman Lake, how many have been up to Kingman Island? So Kingman Island is a man-made island that was made 1910, Trey, map? Yeah, so basically Army Corps was straightening the river, and they had to do something with all these dredgings when they were straightening the river, and that's how Kingman Lake came to be. So Kingman Island came to be, and then Kingman Lake is the inside portion of that, and that at one point had all kinds of exciting plans for it, a water park, and plans on the island itself, a children's education park, but then also had not so good plans like an airport and a dump. So, now the island itself is under the jurisdiction of the district, and we have a whole project that works on programming on the island, but the lake itself is very shallow, so we want to make it so we can canoe from parts of the lake, so we're putting in some canoe channels simultaneously when we're cleaning up the PCB. So that's why we're doing some dredging there. So we'll do dredging for boating and for contamination. In the main stem of the river, we're mostly doing capping, but there's a federal navigation channel that is in the middle of the river that's under the jurisdiction of Army Corps of Engineers. And even though they don't maintain the channel, we still can't place anything in the channel. So in those cases, we have to dig down and then we'll put the cap on top of that. And then the washing channel, there's also contamination there, mostly up at the top of the channel, and it's very deep there, so it will be a cap there as well. So this work is estimated to cost about $50 million. As I said, it's about 50 acres. And this is sort of the first phase, and Riverkeeper and a lot of the other advocates are really watching this because we're saying, all right, we see if cleaning up these hot spots is going to work. And if that work means, are the fish really going to get cleaned up? Are the invertebrates going to get cleaned up? Are the feeder fish going to get cleaned up? So we have partnerships with University of Maryland, Baltimore County, plus U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who are doing all the baseline studies now, and then we'll be doing the performance monitoring once we get the remedy in place. And then we'll see if we have to go back and do more. So that's the overall scope. The work will start in winter 25-26, and actually won't take that long, about 2 years. So we're looking forward to that. And we're starting in Washington Channel, which will be very exciting because we have to move boats around and you're going to be watching us. So I think it'll be an exciting time for
Trey, as someone who's also working with the Anacostia Riverkeepers and understanding that the goal, as Gretchen just said, is the fishable, swimmable Anacostia. Is there anything that you wanted to add about restoration efforts and how close you think we are to that goal?
Absolutely. So we have a complicated relationship with our agencies. We ask them for lots of money. They give us a fair amount of it. We sometimes also ask them to do things better, faster, sooner. One of those things is that we really need the district to do less capping until they have done more dredging first. So I already noted that the entire river, almost the whole 8.5 miles on average, is a centimeter shallower a year. Out front of us right now, the river is half as wide as it should be historically, and it is less than half as deep. We're at high tide as of about an hour ago. The channel of this river, a very narrow section of the quarter-mile width right here, is about 22 to 24 feet. Historically, that should be 40 feet. You go a mile upriver, now the channel is 15 feet deep. Historically, that should still be 30 to 40. You go another mile upriver, the channel is now 8 feet deep. And that's about as deep as the channel gets, minus a couple holes and bends in the river, until you get to Bladensburg Waterfront Park. Bladensburg Waterfront Park, historically, Bladensburg was the second busiest transatlantic shipping port on the East Coast. Because of tobacco being shipped out, because the way tobacco was grown, they had stormwater problems by the late 1700s, early 1800s. They called them spring freshets. Sounds like a nice cold drink for this hot room. It is actually a flood that rips out all your docks. They had stormwater runoff because they had clogged up, sedimented in those streams, those first and second order streams, across the entire upper watershed because it was all turned to agriculture. The last transatlantic shipping load out of Blackman was 1837. So 6 generations of more or less complete European colonization and tobacco farming was slashed and burned. Right. We saw the start and then end of transatlantic shipping. This impacts things in a lot of different ways. It's a big driver for the local region's history. When the port of Bladensburg shut down, Georgetown became hot real estate because it was a close enough port. When the port of Georgetown silted in, the port of Alexandria became hot. When Alexandria silted in, it was one of the things leading us to give back 31 square miles of Virginia, trying to fend off the Civil War. The sedimentation of the river has been going on for a very, very long time. Right now, we don't just need dredging to the bare minimum lowest common denominator for compliance with federal toxics laws, right? Which is what we have planned so far. We also need dredging to account for those bigger storms. We have a bigger storm, there is literally going to be more volume of water trying to get through this same size river at any given point following that storm. We need more cross-section of river to handle the storms we expect to see as climate change continues to accelerate and then progress. And that's assuming we do something about it. We have however many decades of continued on-ramping, right? Continued acceleration of climate effects. If we stop everything now, we still see decades of that, right? And we're not stopping, so we have many decades to centuries of this to deal with. We also need more dredging for equity. The very first black boat club in the United States of America is 2 miles up this river from right here. It's Seafarer Yacht Club. They go back to 1945. They are an embarrassment to the district and to the federal government's failure to dredge this river in the past for any significant level. They did a couple spots in the past century. The Seafarer Yacht Club, the first black boat club in the U.S., can no longer get most of their boats out unless it is high tide. High tide only comes twice a day. That means when they take their boat out, they have to come right back. But they need to keep it out for 12, 24, 36 hours. They can effectively not use a lot of their boats now because of the sedimentation of this river. That is a local but also a federal embarrassment. And that's one that we need to see addressed sooner. So we've been working with the district and DOEE in particular. This is not news to matters Gretchen. Advocating for more dredging sooner, right? And to give credit where credit is due, the district is not doing the sediment project because they got sued, which is how a lot of the small projects on the banks happen. Right? The district heard the voice of about 12, 13 nonprofit groups in 2013 and 2014 when we went to council and advocated for it would be a lot better if we did this up front. And the district did that. So credit where credit is due, the Anacostia River Sediment Project was one of the fastest remedial investigation and feasibility studies of a project of its scale in the country. And it is still on pace to at least keep up and maybe still lead timing-wise for implementation for those first hotspots. But we need y'all's help to make sure that we don't stop after that first round of hotspots. And we need more dredging now because we know that these flood risks are here. We know that this equity failure to ensure proper recreational access is here. And so there should be other pots of money, hopefully federally, if not through potentially responsible parties that have sedimented in the river and otherwise polluted the river, that we need to be tapping sooner. The other big thing we need, and this is a big opportunity in front of the district, once in a lifetime, maybe in a couple lifetimes, the other big thing we need besides more dredging is more wetlands. The Army Corps of Engineers and other entities fill almost every wetland in the watershed. There are restoration wetlands now, but what y'all think of as old wetlands here, right, are not that old. They're 10, 15, 30 years old. They've only just begun to be sort of teenager wetlands, right? Never mind adult wetlands that have been doing those services with flood mitigation and filtration floods all along. The biggest cost in a wetland project is bringing in fill. The biggest cost in the dredging project is dealing with fill. The opportunity for synergy for the District of Columbia right now is immense because not all of the sediment that they should be dredging for equity and for flood mitigation, in addition to getting to the toxic hotspots, will be toxic. And some of it will be mildly toxic, but not so toxic as to preclude it being used at the bottom of the new wetland. Some of it will still be very toxic and will probably need to be dealt with in the Asmat landfill, Texas, Midwest, all the trucking and all the expensive process to that. But a lot of it won't. And with some of the new research coming out about activating carbon amendments, not only putting them on top of a capping project, but we're already too shallow. We cannot afford to cap this river until we dredge to the deeper first. We can also potentially, and this is ongoing research that's just getting started, look at using those activating carbon amendments to remediate the sediment that's dredged up. So that it can then be used safely locally for beneficial reuse, in this case, for building up wetlands. The district has the opportunity to potentially, if they can do it right, solve both of these huge problems with one big physical lift instead of doing two different, very expensive physical lifts separately.
I'd also like to hear a little bit more about the restoration efforts from the Potomac Conservancy, but in particular, Katie, I noticed that the Potomac Conservancy focuses on land protection. So, wanting to step maybe a little bit away from the rivers, although I'd be curious to hear how land protection is helpful in these restoration projects.
Yeah, thank you. So, Potomac Conservancy really appreciates the work of Anacostia Riverkeeper, who spend a lot of time focusing on what's happening in the river right now. That's really important. And that's not all they do, but we really appreciate that work because we spend our time focusing on what's happening on the land pretty exclusively. We know that the Potomac River is only as healthy as the lands around it. So we think it's pretty important to focus on protecting land where water quality is really good, and then restoring land where water quality is poor. So when we look at water quality maps, we know that in the headwaters, which is in West Virginia and Virginia, the water quality is pretty good. We also know that there's a lot more forests out there. There's no original old growth forests on the East Coast at all. So these are not really old forests, but they're healthy forests out in the headwaters region, and we want to keep it that way. So we are a land trust. We were started as a land trust organization, which means that we can hold conservation easements. They're ways for property owners to permanently protect their land for conservation purposes. forever, and it is tied to the property, not to the owner, so that transfers as land ownership transfers. We have permanently protected 15,000 acres in the headwaters, including a big project where we purchased the mountain in Romney, West Virginia, White Horse Mountain, nearly 2,000 acres, and then turned that over to the state of West Virginia to be used forever for recreation and conservation purposes. As we go down the river, the water quality degrades. So it degrades because of agricultural reasons, and then it also degrades because of what we've been talking about with polluted runoff from development. So we are working in those regions primarily with advocacy to try and get decision makers to pass better rules about how land can be used. We advocate for river-smart development. We think that our best line of defense against climate change and for clean water is what is called nature-based solutions. So we heard a lot about green infrastructure. It's basically getting nature to do what it does best, right? So we focus a lot on advocating for better tree and forest protection, especially forest. Those forest ecosystems are really important rather than just individual trees. So we focus a lot on that. We've had some recent wins in Montgomery County strengthening their tree protection laws. So it used to be that in Montgomery County, on average, you only had to replant a quarter of an acre for every acre you cut down. It is now a no net loss of forest rule in Montgomery County. And we recently had a similar win in the state of Maryland, so that will require all counties come up to that level. So that's the kind of policy that we advocate for. It's a grassroots movement, so we need support from individual people to help us get those rules passed and put pressure on decision makers. We know that the causes of the climate crisis are not because individuals have acted poorly, but because systems have acted poorly. We also know that systems are made up of people, right? And there's more of us than there are of those systems. So we have the ability to come together and really advocate for smart development, for development that's centered around transit areas that doesn't need to cut down forests to build more housing developments and things like that. And then finally, we do community conservation. And this is a restoration project that people don't often think about, that I'm really excited about, and that anybody can participate. If you don't own property, if you don't live in a community that can plant trees, you can still contribute to reforesting our region. So we have a program called Tomorrow's Trees. The name for this program is Today's Seed is Tomorrow's Trees. So recently in Maryland, there was a 5 million trees for Maryland bill passed that mandated that 5 million trees be planted in the state of Maryland by 2032, I think. And it was funded, which is fair. However, what we realized is, where are we going to get those 5 million trees from? We don't have 5 million native tree species to plant. Our nurseries in the state of Maryland and in Virginia can't keep up with this demand for native trees. So we have this program, Tomorrow's Trees, where anybody can go out and collect native tree seeds. We give a list of species. They can drop off those seeds at different drop-off sites, or they can join a seed collection or set up a seed collection in your own neighborhood. Those seeds are then given to state nurseries to be grown and planted in these restoration projects around our region. So if you live near a street tree that's dropping acorns, we need your help. If you live in a rural area like I do, and you have a tree in the middle of the field, we need your help. Anybody can participate in that program. You don't have to own property to play a major role in restoring our tree campaign in the forest in our region. So we try to really focus on ways that individuals can help turn this tide, can help change the systems that are causing pollution. And we try to really lift up community voices, listen to what communities need, and then find ways to engage folks in those kind of nature-based solutions.
Thank you so much. So now we've actually gotten to my favorite part of the panel, which is where we can really dive into the sorts of actions that all of us are able to talk about. Maybe you perfectly teed this up for me. I'm going to turn though back, first of all, to Gretchen and Matthew. If there are projects in the DC region that folks can get keyed into as DC residents or DMV residents more generally, or if there are just general programs that you think folks should be looking at, would love to take this opportunity to throw that information out there.
Well, I'll take, Matt will give you the specifics of the DOE programs, but what I'll say is that I think what's really helped me, I've been a member of the Anacostia Community Boat Association, which is right downstream from Seafarers for 20 years. And so to get to know this watershed really helps you to get engaged in whatever you're going to do in the river. So, you know, for me, I'm out on the river at this time of year 4 or 5 times a week for a couple hours of shots, and there's nothing I don't know. You know, I know what's going on with the cleanup, I know what's going on with the storm sewers, and, you know, then you really know the watershed and you'll know where you really want to engage. There's lots of cleanups. There's, you know, the big Earth Day cleanups and Al-Qaeda Day cleanups. The other thing that I always encourage people is right now we have some documents we have documents all the time that go to public comment. So it's really important that citizens look at these documents and have their voices heard. And if you can visit our websites occasionally, that's one good way to get alerted of those. We also have a sign-in where you can say, I want to be signed up for alerts, so you can go to our website and sign up for that. And the other thing I always say is when you're out and about, if you're, whether in Maryland or DC, you should tell your representatives that, you know, we want more money for the rivers. We want to clean up the river. We want, you know, more money for dredging. I wanted to tell Trey, because he probably doesn't know this, the district, we did just get $1.5 million to do the dredging feasibility study, which I just happened to be alerted of 2 days ago. So we are you know, listening to the advocates, and again, we at DOE also have to press the mayor and our city representatives to support the programs that we're really committed to. So I think knowing the watershed, trying to stay abreast of what the major documents that are under consideration, and you know, getting out there as much as you can. Don't bring trash on the ground because we know it all ends up in the river.
Thanks. I remain an optimist because there are so many opportunities for folks to become watershed stewards. If you took your reusable bags to the grocery store, or you paid the 5 cents for the plastic bags, which goes to a good cause, you've done your part. If you're a pet owner and you're picking up the pet waste and not letting it wash downstream, become pollution, you are doing your part. If you have space and capacity and interest in being a River Smart Homes customer, go to riversmarthomes.org. I have to keep talking about trees, my favorite practice, just because it helps bridge how to manage stormwater pollution, how to mitigate climate change in a warming city. Trees are magical. You know, they help improve air quality, cool the city, and manage the stormwater. And we will plant trees for free if you have the space. With the changing climate, it's interesting that we're having to start looking at the types of trees that we're planting, what's going to thrive in our area that may be different than several decades ago. But trees are one of the solutions. Also, just please get out there and engage and explore. If you've never been out to Cayman Island, check out Cayman Island and help us activate it and use the space. It's an ongoing restoration project area where we're helping get the invasive species under control, doing a lot of native planting, and there's a lot more to come, and there's opportunities for public input as well with the restoration of Cayman Island. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. So now, final question of the night. I'm sure there are a few people waiting for me to use the word final. Before I ask a question, I did just want to tell you all one of the other ways to get involved is to continue interacting with these organizations. I know for a fact you can find they all have their websites, you can find them all on Instagram, and a really great way to continue to learn more is to continue to go to educational events. So please also consider checking climate classes out as well, because we do love to do these sorts of events. But Trey and Katie, the final question for the evening that I have for you is, one of the big missions of both of your respective organizations is this idea of building community around these sorts of projects, which I think is, as someone who does work in that sort of capacity, I think is so important. But I'd love to hear from both of you the sort of value you think that comes with the idea of not just doing projects, but building a community around these sorts of projects. So who wants to go first?
So, personal story. I have 2 kids, and a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I have to tell you, the decision, I work every day in environmental work. I've done it for a really long time. I know what the challenges that we're facing. And it was a hard decision to have kids. And I decided that the most radical act of hope that I could do was to have children, and to try and raise those children to live in a world where we care about our environment because we are a part of that environment, because it is a part of us, because it is not something separate that we take from, but it is something that we live and learn with. I try to live by a principle of living in service to my descendants, right? So what can I do to make this place better than how I found it? And I think that kind of act of radical hope is something that really resonates with individuals when we talk on a community level. Like, what do we need to do as a community? And one of the things that I've found that's lacking is that sense of community, right? That we don't know our neighbors anymore, that we don't have those kind of relationships with the people that live around us to support one another. And I said before that these problems are caused by systems, but we are bigger than the systems. So the only way to really face that is together. We are not very powerful as individuals, right? We are hugely powerful as communities. You've heard tonight from DOEE that they have these opportunities for public comment, but people don't show up, right? Like, how many times have you all sat in an empty room when it's been open for public comment? The only way that we know about these opportunities is if we talk to each other. So we have to start by building communities that we lost, and then we have to join together with those communities and demand change. We are bigger than the systems that are causing these issues. We just have to remember our own power and develop that power. So that's why we think working on the community level is so important. I will also just say we are so lucky to live where we live. The Potomac is called the wildest urban river. It is beautiful. And Potomac Conservancy spends a lot of time getting people just to go out. Right now, in Georgetown at Cambridge Boathouse, we've got about 100 people out paddling for our alternative happy hours. Instead of going to the bar, we invite people to come and paddle on the river. We also know that we need to build that sense of community. We need to build it around our water, right? It's the water we drink. It's really important for us to protect it. If you see it, if you experience it, if you get to just see how lucky we are to have that, you're going to be compelled to protect it and tell your friends, tell your neighbors. So that's why we do this work, and that's why I do this work.
I want to shout out Katie for creating community amongst volunteers who serve environmental groups. She started a group for all of us that we cleanups and plantings and all kinds of things a ways back. The ideas of community and reciprocity are really, really important. The idea of reciprocity, I think we're bringing that word out earlier, Katie. If you have never read Braiding Sweetgrass, you should. If you've never heard of it, you should jot it down real quick. Braiding Sweetgrass is a phenomenal book about the intersection of Native people's knowledge, indigenous knowledge, indigenous systems, and nature and science, and all the ways that these things can and should, used to, and might again tie into each other. Reciprocity is a really, really big part of that. Another book you should read, and I don't know if kind of class has ever done this, a way that you could build a community is you could start a local club, even if it's only once. For Braiding Sweetgrass, you can also start a ministry for the future. It's the first time I heard the genre sci-fi, the climate fiction. It is an amazing and frightening book. It's on a happier note, but it gets scary in the middle because it's about now and the soon. It's not sci-fi. It's about aliens, 10,000 stars away, 10,000 years out. Right? It's very clearly now, and it's very clearly soon. There's things that are happening now. DC shut down twice in the past month for smoke. We had air alerts for smoke from fires thousands of miles away. I've lived here for a decade. I asked people that would live here for longer. No one has ever remembered anything like that. Right? I have personally felt 118 degree heat here in DC. It's astonishing how real these things are. So think about ways to do community that aren't necessarily what I'm about to follow up with, which is all our ways. But things like a book club, right? Things like just talk to your neighbors. If you don't know all your neighbors, go meet your neighbors. Go to your civic association. Go to your ANC meetings. You don't have to go to every single one. Just go to one and see what happens, right? Also follow all of our socials. Go to our website. We have a lot of stuff going on. We do fishing, Friday night fishing on this dock right here. Department of Conservation Board, our host tonight. And this is the 11th summer we're doing it. We still find a lot of people that didn't know we did it. We do it every Friday, right? We do it on that dock. And that's teaching catch and release fishing. It is not safe to fish in this river yet. It is also engaging people with the river. And we've started talking about restoring and protecting it. So the big part of that is creating these opportunities for people to just meet the river. One of the programs that Gretchen and Matt didn't really talk about is the Anacostia River Explorers Program. DOEE uses the money from the bag tax and disposable bags to pay groups like us and AWS to give y'all free boat tours for the public. And it was one of the most forward-thinking and systematically impactful things I think the agency has ever done, and one that we need to see the investment steps back up for. Right? Because most people have never been on this river. People who are new to DC, which is a lot of us in this room, going by skin tone, we're used to rivers that are safe to jump into. Right? I grew up on the coast of North Carolina. I do water work now because I grew up in the water. I cared about water because I grew up in the water. The district people in the district have been severed from their river, right? Physically, by highways and railroads for the next 4 miles on both sides of this river as you go up. Even Capitol Hill can walk down the river easily. Never mind what's 748. Right? They've been severed culturally. Don't go anywhere near that dirty, dangerous river. You can see the comments about our swim. Oh my God, I would never do that. Oh my God, this. Oh my God, that. They got worse. I'm not going to go into that now. Right? But people, some of them are rightfully concerned about the water. A lot of them have just been told for so long not to go anywhere near that water. When we get people, especially older people of color that have lived in DC the whole time, above the railroad tracks, bridge, above the skating rink, and they see that first section of the river that's entirely green, right? Some of them cry. Their eyes all get big, right? People do not know what an asset they have now, but they don't know what they've had in their backyard this whole time. And so this idea of connection is really, really important. Y'all all get to go on the boat, bring other people on boat tours later this year or next year, bring people to the late skates, Fringe of Anacostia Park does once a month down at the skating rink in Anacostia Park. Just use the trail, right? Walking and biking, go birding, go do whatever, paddling. You don't have to be on the river, just be near it. Right? But bring other people with you and keep bringing other people in. And that idea of the community, I think, is a really important. Get that on the head with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you all to all of our panelists tonight. Final note I just have is thank you to all of you for joining with us in community tonight. This is so important that each of you took time out of, I'm sure, a very busy, a very hot day to sit in an even hotter room and to talk about this and to become introduced to these people, to their projects, and of course, the stars of the show, the two rivers. So thank you all for your time. We hope to see you. We hope to continue to be able to join in community with all of you.